Hello, I'm Dilek Tuna and you're watching A News. Now let's take a look at today's top stories. Ukrainian President Zelensky says he will discuss the US peace proposal with President Donald Trump. At least 41 people have died due to relentless flooding in central Vietnam. Iran officially pulls out of cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says Kyiv is analysing a new US peace proposal aimed at ending the war with Russia after receiving the draft plan from a visiting American delegation on Thursday. The proposal includes major territorial and security provisions and has already prompted sharp reactions in Kyiv.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says he's dedicated for honest work on the US peace proposal that he formally received on Thursday. The 28-point plan was delivered by US Army Secretary Daniel Driscoll and aims to intensify negotiations to end the nearly four-year war. Zelensky says Kyiv is reviewing it with Washington and European partners.
The American side provided its proposals, the points of the plan to end the war. Their vision. Ukraine needs peace, and a real peace that will not be broken by a third invasion. We agreed that our teams will work on these proposals. We will not make abrupt statements. We are committed to clear and honest work with the United States, with Europe, and with our partners around the world. I expect to speak with President Trump in the coming days. We know that the strength and support of America can truly bring peace closer, and we do not want to lose that.
In the proposal, Ukraine would surrender additional eastern territory in exchange for long-term US security guarantees. According to US and Ukrainian officials cited by news agency Axios, the framework would grant Russia full de facto control of all of Luhansk and Donetsk and freeze current lines in Kherson and Zaporizhia, with withdrawn areas becoming a demilitarized buffer. The plan also calls for Kyiv to cap its armed forces, limit long-range weapons, and renounce NATO membership conditions Ukrainian officials say are unacceptable. Sources say Qatar and Turkey helped shape the draft, and that Zelensky's national security advisor Rustem Umerov held direct talks with Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio says Washington is preparing serious and realistic ideas, arguing that any durable peace will require difficult compromises on both sides.
Ukraine's city of Kupiansk has reportedly been captured by Russian forces, although Kyiv denies this claim. Meanwhile, Ukraine says it has struck a Russian oil refinery in an effort to weaken Russia's military economic capacity.
Russia's army says it has taken control of the strategic city of Kupiansk in Ukraine's Kharkiv region. However, Ukraine's military denies the city has changed hands. President Vladimir Putin visited the command post of Russia's West Group on Thursday, where commanders briefed him on the army's progress in the city.
Units of the West Grouping have liberated the city of Kupiansk and are continuing to destroy Ukrainian armed forces units surrounded on the left bank of the Oskol River.
The army says it has also captured more than 80% of Vovchansk in the Kharkiv region, with further advances underway in Pokrovsk, another strategic city in eastern Ukraine. Russia has been pressuring Pokrovsk for more than a year, using a pincer movement in an attempt to encircle it and cut supply lines. Russian military maps now show the city under Russian control, with Ukrainian troops surrounded in nearby Myrnohrad. Moscow says that capturing Pokrovsk would provide a platform to push north toward the two largest remaining Ukrainian-held cities in the Donetsk region, Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. However, Ukraine also dismisses that Russian forces have taken over large parts of Pokrovsk and Vovchansk near the Russian border. Meanwhile, Ukraine's Air Force said it carried out fresh strikes on an oil refinery in the Russian city of Ryazan in an effort to weaken Russia's military economic capacity. The attack cut power to parts of the southwestern Kursk region overnight, leaving more than 16,000 residents without electricity, according to regional authorities. These developments come as US Army Secretary Daniel Driscoll met Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv on Thursday to discuss a new US-drafted proposal for Russia-Ukraine peace talks.
A Russian strike on the southeastern city of Zaporizhia has killed 5 people. 3 others were injured, according to Regional Governor Ivan Fedorov. Authorities say the attack was carried out with guided bombs and ignited several buildings. Emergency services were deployed to fight fires and evacuate wounded civilians. Fedorov had earlier issued a warning of an impending attack by Russian guided bombs. At the United Nations Security Council, Russia, the United States and Ukraine had very different visions on how to end the nearly 4-year war. Moscow defended its offensive, Washington pressed for negotiations, and Kyiv insisted that no peace can come at the price of its territory.
The Security Council met in New York on Thursday as fighting in Ukraine continued to intensify. Russia's ambassador Vasily Nebenzia accused President Volodymyr Zelensky of enforcing violent mobilization, refusing to retreat from encircled cities and seeking a ceasefire, only to give defeated forces a breather.
Zelensky wants to show his Western sponsors that the front is holding. As for the hypocritical appeals for peace, neither Zelensky nor his handlers seek peace.
The United States rejected that narrative. Ambassador Mike Waltz urged both sides to halt the fighting and return to diplomacy, saying Washington has offered Moscow generous terms, including sanctions relief. But civilian casualties continue to rise. During the meeting, Ukraine reported a Russian strike on Zaporizhia that killed at least 5 people. Kyiv's deputy ambassador, Kristina Hayovyshin, called it an attempt to erase Ukraine's identity from the map.
As a result of the attack by Russia, which took place during this very meeting, at least 5 have been killed and 3 more wounded in Zaporizhia. This is a systematic and deliberate policy aimed at annihilating the Ukrainian people, culture, identity, historical heritage, and our right to exist as a free and dignified nation. There will never be any recognition, formal or otherwise, of Ukrainian territory temporarily occupied by the Russian Federation as Russian.
Hayovyshin said Ukraine is ready to review the US draft plan, but stressed Kyiv's red lines. No territorial concessions, no limits on its armed forces, and no decisions without Ukraine. She added that the only viable path to ending the war is forcing Russia to retreat economically, politically, and militarily.
Turning to the world of aviation now, Vilnius Airport in Lithuania resumed operations on Thursday evening after shutting down for more than an hour when smugglers' balloons were once again appeared on radar. Early in the day, Lithuania reopened border crossings with Belarus that were closed last month over similar airspace violations. Officials warned the checkpoints could shut again if these hybrid attacks continue. Lithuania blames Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, who dismisses the closures as a crazy scam. Now we take a moment to look back in time. This week marks 30 years since the Dayton Peace Agreement ended the Bosnian War, a conflict that killed more than 100,000 people and left deep scars across former Yugoslavia. Our report explains how the deal brought Europe's bloodiest post-Cold War fighting to an end.
30 years ago, one of Europe's bloodiest post-Cold War conflicts came to an end. For more than 3.5 years, the Bosnian War pitted Bosniaks, Croats and Serbs against one another after the breakup of Yugoslavia. Sarajevo endured the longest siege in modern European history, where more than 11,000 people were killed under constant sniper and artillery fire. Between 1992 and 1995, communities were torn apart. Neighborhoods survived with almost no water, electricity, or food. Images of street fighting, mortar blasts, and civilians running for cover came to define a conflict that left over 100,000 dead. Among the worst atrocities was the 1995 Srebrenica genocide, when Serb forces under General Ratko Mladic overran a UN-protected enclave and executed around 8,000 Muslim men and boys. Their bodies were dumped in mass graves, later exhumed and used as evidence in war crimes trials. As the war escalated, the United States pushed intensive negotiations at an airbase in Dayton, Ohio. In November 1995, Bosnian, Serbian and Croatian leaders reached a deal to end the fighting. Weeks later in Paris, they signed the Dayton Peace Agreement, creating two autonomous entities inside Bosnia, linked by a weak central government.
The parties have pledged to cooperate fully with a NATO-led peace implementation force and to ensure the safety of its personnel. And it sets the stage for a comprehensive program of reconstruction.
NATO peacekeepers soon deployed, launching Europe's largest post-war stabilization mission. For many Bosnians watching the signing on television, Dayton offered the first glimpse of normal life after years of terror. In the decades that followed, international tribunals convicted Bosnian Serb leaders Radovan Karadzic and Ratko Mladic of genocide and war crimes. Slobodan Milosevic died in The Hague in 2006 while awaiting a verdict. And today, the cemeteries of Srebrenica remain among the war's starkest reminders.
And in news from Brazil, US President Donald Trump removed 40% tariffs on the country's food products on Thursday, including beef, coffee, cocoa and fruits. The tax hikes were imposed in July in response to legal actions against Trump's ally, Brazil's former president Jair Bolsonaro. The change applies to goods arriving after the 13th of November. Brazil supplies about a third of the coffee consumed in the US and has become a key source of beef, especially for burgers. The rollback follows a similar White House decision last Friday when tariffs on other agricultural products were lifted. And now in climate news, as a report from weather agency SAFAR has classified New Delhi's air quality as hazardous. Residents have expressed frustration over what they say are inadequate government measures to tackle pollution.
Air quality in India's capital remained at hazardous levels on Thursday, with Delhi's pollution crisis again sparking calls for stronger government action. Weather agency SAFAR recorded an air quality index of 399, placing the city in the very poor category. Residents voiced frustration over what they see as years of insufficient measures.
This issue of pollution has been going on for the last 10 to 15 years. There's no permanent solution to it unless the government takes a serious stance. If they think by restricting vehicles and imposing curbs, there'll be no change. It won't make a difference. They should set a target to plant at least 20 million trees in Delhi every year.
Pollution must be reduced. Because of pollution, my wife has fallen sick. I am out in the morning even though the government says avoid morning walks. However, I am helpless. Therefore, it has to be reduced.
India aims to expand forest and green cover to 33% of its land area by 2030, up from 24%, as part of its Paris Agreement commitments. Authorities have banned non-essential construction and taken other steps to curb pollution. Each winter, cold air traps dust, vehicle emissions and smoke from crop burning across Delhi and neighbouring districts, leaving millions struggling with respiratory problems.
Talks at the COP30 summit in Brazil have been thrown into chaos after a fire forced thousands of delegates to flee the venue. And as negotiations resume, a major rift over fossil fuels is threatening to derail the final agreement.
Panic spread through the COP30 venue in Belém when a fire broke out inside an exhibition pavilion just after lunch. Flames climbed the interior lining of the building, before firefighters brought the blaze under control within minutes. 13 people were treated for smoke inhalation, and thousands of delegates were evacuated from the building, stopping the talks instantly. The timing could not have been worse. Negotiators had already missed a key deadline on climate finance and fossil fuel commitments, with less than a day left before the summit's planned end. Earlier in the day, Brazil circulated a new draft proposal. It proposed tripling adaptation finance by 2030, but again offered no roadmap for moving away from fossil fuels. That omission reignited long-standing tensions between countries demanding clarity and those resisting any commitment. And now, The Guardian reports exclusively that the dispute has escalated. At least 29 countries have signed a letter warning Brazil they will block any final deal that does not include a fossil fuel transition roadmap. According to the news outlet, Brazil was preparing to drop the roadmap entirely under pressure from petrostates such as Saudi Arabia and Russia, and major consumers such as India and China. Supporters, including more than 80 countries, call the roadmap a red line for proving progress on the post-COP28 fossil pledge. But opposition remains strong. At the same time, poorer countries are pushing for firm guarantees on adaptation funding. Many say past pledges, including last year's $300 billion target, have failed to materialise, deepening mistrust. Talks are now set to run into the weekend because of the disruption on Thursday. The real challenge for COP30 is whether countries can break the deadlock over fossil fuels and finance, or leave Belém without the progress many expected.
We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll discuss the latest in the Ukraine-Russia peace process. Do stay with us. Welcome back to A News. Ukrainian President Zelensky met with US envoy Daniel Driscoll in Turkey, who handed him the draft of a new peace plan. Both sides have agreed to work on the plan's provisions in order to seek a just end to the war. The plan, however, may require Ukraine to make difficult concessions, ceding territory, some areas of Donbass, significantly reducing its armed forces and handing over some of its weapons. To help us understand this further, we're joined by Anna Evans, political analyst from Lisbon. Anna, welcome once again to the program.
Thank you.
Now, do you think Kyiv is ready to give in to all of Russia's demands, or will this be yet another plan that leads nowhere? Because they've explicitly expressed that territorial integrity cannot be compromised.
Right, Dilek, but the notion that territorial integrity cannot be compromised is mostly a political narrative, because we know that there is no chance of a peace settlement without concessions on the Ukrainian side. And so those concessions inevitably will go through territorial concessions because, you know, Russia has invaded the country. It has spent so much resources, so much men with boots on the ground, so many losses of lives. So there is no way, unfortunately, that Russia will go out of the picture without the government telling its population that the war effort has paid off. So Russia will have to have some benefits out of these negotiations, and territorial concessions are part of those benefits. Basically, what we are seeing here is an attempt by the Trump administration to recalculate what each party will gain if the war stops immediately. So basically, what this proposed peace deal is doing is trying to convince the Russians that if they stop the war now, they will get benefits out of that, and more benefits than they would if they keep on fighting. And the same thing with Ukraine. So the Ukrainian part also needs to be convinced that it will gain more benefits from stopping the war now than it will if it keeps trying, to defend its territory and pushing the Russians back. So basically, this is what we are witnessing, an attempt of a package that includes financial measures, security guarantees, and territorial concessions, and also the way these two countries, Russia and Ukraine, will be integrated in the international system from now onwards. So this is the package that is trying to convince both countries that it will be better for them to stop fighting at this moment. So basically, this is what we are seeing. And having said this, Ukraine, of course, needs to be convinced that it will be beneficial for it, to accept some concessions that are part of this proposed plan.
Okay. So you framed this as a recalculation and what each side can gain if the fighting stops right now. So in light of that, the plan repeats most of Russia's maximalist demands, but Zelensky had a constructive reaction, which suggests that it was so as not to antagonize Trump. Do you agree?
Well, I agree that the plan, in terms of territorial concessions, is favorable to Russia. But again, this is a balance, this is an equilibrium of concessions that aim to offer benefits on both sides. And so we cannot just have a look at territorial concessions, we need to address the whole package. So for example, the plan foresees security guarantees that would imply that if Russia occupies or invades Ukraine again, then, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and its members will act as if, this is an attack on the transatlantic region. And so this is a really very major security guarantee because, so far what has happened is that NATO and Europe have abstained from directly intervening, notwithstanding, of course, all the armament, but having a security guarantee that if Russia trespasses what has been agreed, then the transatlantic will intervene, that is a major, major guarantee. And the presence of high-level US military personnel in Ukraine and also the involvement of the Pentagon in these discussions signals that, the US are really taking seriously the security guarantees. So this is not just about territory. So for example, the US is very interested, as we know, in critical raw materials and rare earths because it is huge with China considering that dominating the world market and global supply chains on rare earths and several industrial and defense critical raw materials. And so the US, in running against China, is interested in developing projects of extractions in Ukraine, but also in the Arctic, where Russia plays an important role. And so we need to take into account that there are third interests that are not directly related to the conflict in itself, but which also stimulate US foreign and the security guarantees that the US is willing to in order to press for peace. So there are, other regions in the world that are part of this bargain and which are not necessarily just the territorial concessions in Ukraine. And then we also have the financial aspect, because reconstruction will need to begin, and it needs to be seen who is going to be involved in the reconstruction and what kinds of financial perks that reconstruction will offer to the involved parties. And this is, of course, a very important aspect, the financial aspect. So what will be the benefits for Ukraine in financial terms, and what will be the benefits for Russia as well in financial terms? And the agreement, the plan, is very clear that it proposes to bring Russia back to the international world order in the financial aspect. So withdraw sanctions, bring Russia back to the G7, G8, bring Russia back to a normalized trade and interaction at the financial world level. And at the same time, provide financial conditions for Ukraine to start rebuilding and start normalizing. And so there is also the forecast that the Russian assets that have been freezed will be defreezed to be used in the reconstruction, and that Ukraine, for example, can expect membership in the European Union to advance at a more accelerated pace. So Ukraine will be brought into Europe as in terms of European Union, its institutional framework, its security framework, its financial framework, and at the same time, Russia will receive its own payoffs by collaborating on Arctic projects, by coming back to the international financial system, by seeing the sanctions lifted, and by entering a set of cooperation agreements. So this is not just, we can't just be looking at the territory, and we can't just be talking about Russians' maximalist pressures, because this is a package, and in the package, there are many different aspects that make this package.
Okay, and so on the one hand, the plan does appear to be advantageous for both sides, but let's have a look at the negotiation. The secret peace plan was negotiated between the United States, and Russia. Once again, Ukraine and the Europeans were left out. Do you think Trump has once again favored Putin?
Not necessarily. Negotiations are sequences, political sequences, and bargaining is a very complex procedure that involves different actors and different elements of the negotiation in different stages of the procedure. And so we do not need to have all actors sitting down in all stages of the negotiation. So there are, different aspects of this bargaining package that involve different sorts of actors, and not necessarily all of them sitting at the same time. And so as an analyst, I do not observe this as a faux pas, as a mistake. On the contrary, I see this as part of a given sequence where each different actor involved will have a say, but not necessarily in all stages of the negotiation. Okay. And so it makes sense that the United States first needs to convince Russia to come to the negotiation table and to accept that if it stops the war now, it will have much more benefits than if it keeps fighting. And only after Russia has agreed to this, then it makes sense to add the other parties, because nothing will happen without Russia's agreement, unfortunately. You see, this is a conflict where there are, in military terms, we do not have a clear winner or a clear loser. And when this happens, when there is no military capitulation as such, what we know from history is that the only way to finalize the conflict is to convince both parties that they will gain more in stopping now than in going further on and on. And so this is what we know historically, and this is what these negotiations are about.
Okay. All right, so certainly reactions will emerge to the peace plan, and already we know European countries, including France, Germany and the EU, have expressed reservations about the plan as it stands, especially since they've been left out. So what differences are emerging between Washington and European capitals? What do you think we'll see surfacing in the upcoming days?
Well, in these processes, there is a lot of narrative and counter-narrative, and countries positioning themselves and making displays of diplomatic strength, and convincing the international fora of countries and organizations that they are maintaining their position and not diplomatically capitulating, if we can put it this way. So it is part of the game that the Europeans will make positions of force and say that they need to be involved, that Ukraine deserves a fair peace and just peace, and these kinds of narratives that play the stakes high. However, what really matters is how the end game will result. Meaning, the fact that the parties, protest and say they were not involved and make positions of strength in political, diplomatic, and narrative terms does not necessarily mean that this is the outcome they expect. It's just part of the game. In addition to a military conflict, we have constant diplomatic negotiations and constant information and counter-information narratives that play, this informational game, which is a game that happens at the same time as the military conflict on the field. And so this is part of the process. However, again, what really matters here is if peace is achieved and in terms that are feasible and that are not too unequal for both parties. And what do I mean by this? We're constantly hearing that Ukraine must have a just and fair peace. The European leaders are constantly saying this. But what is a just and fair peace in a country that has been invaded? I don't think that there is any just or fair peace, after 3.5 years of invasion and so many destruction and so many lives that have been lost. So unfortunately, no matter what the outcome is, unfortunately for Ukraine, it will not erase these 3.5 years of war and occupation. So what we need to focus at this point is really on how there can be a package that secures guarantees of defense and security that are so strong that Russia will not dare, to trespass again in terms of invading Ukraine.
Okay.
And at the same time, how can, the allies protect the reconstruction and guarantee that we will not go back to where we were 3 years ago.
Okay, Anna, thank you so much for joining us. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for. I appreciate your participation in the program.
Thank you.
Now we'll take a break. When we return, we'll take a look at the key stories shaping the region. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. Now let's take a closer look at the key stories shaping the region. The US is deepening its ties with Azerbaijan, a move Forbes magazine says could reshape regional trade and energy networks. The country's strategic position in Central Asia is attracting growing Western attention.
The United States is strengthening its partnership with Azerbaijan, focusing on energy, trade and regional security. Forbes reports that Baku's recent integration into the Central Asian bloc opens new opportunities for cooperation with the US and Europe. Azerbaijan is rich in oil, gas and rare earth minerals, resources that are increasingly important for global industry and technology. According to the International Energy Agency, the country is among the world's most energy self-sufficient nations. US-Azerbaijan ties have long been limited by a 1992 law known as the Freedom Support Act, which included a rule called Section 907. This rule originally blocked direct US aid to Azerbaijan due to its conflict with Armenia. Over the years, US presidents, including George W. Bush, Joe Biden and Donald Trump, have repeatedly waived this restriction, allowing closer cooperation. Forbes notes that further easing of these rules could open the door to major projects, including transport corridors, pipelines, railways and fiber optic lines across the South Caucasus. Analysts say the partnership also helps the US counterbalance Russia and China, giving Washington access to strategic resources while supporting Eurasian countries seeking more independence from Moscow and Beijing. For Azerbaijan, the relationship boosts its strategic role in the Caucasus, increases trade and energy links, and enhances its international profile.
Baku is hosting the D8 Media Forum today, bringing together senior officials, editors-in-chief and media executives from member countries to discuss cooperation across the information sphere. The event focuses on strengthening regional information exchange, countering disinformation and developing joint digital media projects. The program includes panel sessions on responsible journalism, digital innovation, strategic communication and crisis management, followed by a workshop on media ethics in the digital age. Around 150 participants are attending, including 71 international representatives from the 8 D8 member states and the organisation's secretariat.
Since the joint D8 organization, that is the essence of this initiative.
Iran has declared its cooperation agreement with the International Atomic Energy Agency officially terminated on Thursday. This follows a new resolution adopted by the IAEA Board of Governors, calling on Tehran to grant the agency full access on its nuclear program.
Cairo agreement between Iran and the International Atomic Energy Agency has officially ended. On Thursday, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi announced that Tehran has sent an official letter to the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency declaring that the agreement is no longer valid. The move comes in reaction to resolution adopted at the IAEA Board of Governors by the United States and 3 European countries. Resolution called on Iran to provide it with access and information regarding its nuclear program as required under UN directives. The document's purpose was primarily to renew and adjust the IAEA's mandate to report on aspects of Iran's nuclear program. But it also stated Iran must quickly provide the IAEA with the answers and access it wants, 5 months after airstrikes by Israel and the US. The resolution passed with 19 votes in favour, 3 against and 12 abstentions. Diplomats at the meeting in Vienna said Russia, China and Niger were the countries that opposed it. However, Araghchi described the action as illegal and unjustified, stating that these countries, by disregarding Iran's engagement, have undermined the credibility of the IAEA. Now, current developments show that Cairo agreement is no longer in effect anymore. The agreement, signed on September 9th this year, was a technical cooperation framework aimed at restoring the International Atomic Energy Agency's inspections in Iran after a suspension of cooperation.
Facing a growing regional crisis, the Caspian Sea, the world's largest inland body of water, is experiencing an unprecedented drop in water levels. Iran's 650-kilometre southern coastline is no exception, suffering severe economic and ecological consequences. Our correspondent Tura Shiraliliu reports.
This is Caspian Sea from Iran's northern Bandar Anzali port city in Gilan province, the country's historical hub of shipping and transit with Central Asia, Caucasus and Europe, as well as fishery and agricultural activities. Together with Gilan, two Iranian provinces of Mazandaran and Golestan build the 650-kilometer coastline to the south of the sea out of its total 7,000-kilometer coastline. Similar to other littoral states of the Caspian Basin, Iran is experiencing the degrading environmental consequences of severe decline in the world's largest inland body of water. The Caspian Sea reached lowest recorded level at 29.2 meters below sea level in 2024, marking a dramatic 2.3-meter decline since 1996 and representing the most severe water crisis in the sea's documented history. Experts refer to reduced inflows from feeder Volga River, accelerated evaporation, and climate change as factors behind the alarming trend in dramatic decline in water levels. The Caspian Sea countries, including Iran, are facing its existential implications in biodiversity and regional economies, negatively affecting livelihood of millions of people living along its coastline. According to a report by the Stimson Center, a combination of climate and human interventions are the drivers of declining water levels. It cites the rise in temperature, decline in rainfall, increased evaporation, reduced river discharges, together with extensive dam building and river control measures, particularly on the Volga River, severely limiting freshwater deliveries as the factors behind the shrinkage. In the meantime, efforts to address the Caspian catastrophe have remained inconclusive due to geopolitical considerations and competing national interests among the littoral states. The Convention for the Protection of the Marine Environment of the Caspian Sea, signed in 2003 in Tehran and effective since 2006, provides a framework for environmental cooperation, but its implication has not been enough and complete. Restoration of the Caspian Sea ecosystem is not a luxury, but a necessity requiring a strategy built on collective will of its neighboring countries. Turaj Shiralilu, Bandar Anzali, Gilan Province, Foray News.
DA Afghanistan Bank is pushing ahead with efforts to modernise the country's financial system. And this week, senior officials have been in Turkey seeking technical support. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has more from Kabul.
On an official visit to Turkey, the first deputy governor of the Afghanistan Bank, Siddiqullah Khalid, has held high-level talks with the Participation Banks Association of Turkey, known as TKBB. The delegation met with the association's chairman, Ismail Yoral, and other senior members. TKBB is considered a leader in digital banking, credited with supporting the creation of digital banks across Turkey and helping raise online banking usage to some of the highest levels in the region. During the meeting, Mr. Khalid highlighted Afghanistan's shift to a fully Islamic banking system. He said interest-based banking has been halted nationwide, and all commercial banks now operate under Islamic financial contracts. He also emphasized Afghanistan's push toward digital payments, describing it as a crucial step in modernizing the country's financial infrastructure. Kabul is now seeking Turkey's support in building electronic payment systems, strengthening technical capacity, and training Afghan banking staff. Both sides agreed that TKBB will send a technical team to Afghanistan to assess the current state of electronic payments and help evaluate the central bank's newly drafted master plan. They also reached an agreement to establish training programs inside Afghanistan aimed at helping staff adopt more quickly to digital systems. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Now we'll take a short break. When we return, we'll discuss what the D8 Media Forum in Baku looks to achieve and how it fits into Azerbaijan's wider push to position itself as a regional hub for media cooperation and information policy. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. Baku is hosting a media forum of the Developing 8 Organisation for Economic Cooperation, D8, under the theme Fostering Dialogue, Collaboration and Regional Cohesion. Organised by Azerbaijan's Media Development Agency, the event brings together heads of media structures, leading outlets from D8 member countries and senior industry experts to discuss closer cooperation, information exchange and ways to counter disinformation in an increasingly contested media environment. Joining me now to discuss is Sheraz Mahmoud Khan. Sheraz, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, the theme is fostering dialogue, collaboration and regional cohesion. In practical terms, what kinds of dialogue and collaboration are being prioritised between these very different media markets?
Well, you know, the kind of participation, all these D8 countries are very significant middle powers in their regions and all that. And all of these countries are fostering relations with each other as well. For example, Pakistan, Azerbaijan, Turkey, Bangladesh, Egypt, Iran, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Nigeria, and Azerbaijan itself hosting this amazing D8 conference, which is obviously a need of an hour, because all these countries are emerging powers in their own respective regions, and the media plays a very, very important role, a very significant role to promote cooperation and to promote understanding between the countries, and they can bring bring in the journalists and bring other people like policymakers, and they can always promote their own dialogue and exchange their ideas and all that. So this is very important for all these countries, because here, for example, Azerbaijan itself, let's take an example of Azerbaijan as where we're sitting right now. Mm-hmm. Azerbaijan has a lot of narratives to build on, and media would play a very pivotal role in that. For example, there's a middle corridor going on. A lot of people don't know about the middle corridor in the region, in the regions where they don't have an interest in Central Asian countries. The media would promote this very narrative as how this is important for the region, and how does it connect the different regions of different different countries and different regions, and how Azerbaijan can be significant in trade, in communication, and all that.
Okay.
So likewise, as A News is doing a really great job. I, being a foreigner, do not really know a lot of languages and all that, but just English. So A News is promoting Azerbaijan and other parts of the region as well. So that's how the media, plays a very, very pivotal role in building a narrative of a country. And all these countries, since they are, growing countries, they are middle powers and very important powers in their regions. take example of Egypt, or be it Egypt or be it Bangladesh, be it Indonesia, Malaysia, and Nigeria, apart from Azerbaijan, Pakistan, and Turkey. So, for example, right now, a very important, parade took place. A military parade was shown in Azerbaijan, where Pakistan and Turkey were the guests there. So, all the media of 3 countries were showing that parade, and that was a significant parade where Azerbaijan was strategically, strategically improved in a way, militarily improved in a way that it showed JF-17 Thunders. So that was shown to the whole world that Azerbaijan has been equipped with JF-17 Thunders, and that is the military might Azerbaijan has it. And and for example, a lot of people do not know in the West. A lot of people do not know about the Karabakh conflict and all that, unless until you're a research scholar or you're a politician and all that. But media plays a very important role in that as well. How
Certainly.
Azerbaijan took their territories back after decades. So yes, this is very important to foster regional cohesion, to promote positive narratives and all that. But then we have a lot of challenges as well at the same time. The challenges could be fake media, fake narrative, propagandas, which can ruin the very perspective and the narrative of the countries.
Okay,
so
let's
we need to address that.
Let's hone in on some of those
Yeah,
risks, actually, Shiraz. The agenda also includes joint mechanisms to counter disinformation and promote digital media projects. Now, how big a concern is disinformation across the D8 countries, and what kind of joint response are they talking about?
Well, you know what? Disinformation would be obviously those countries who are not your allies would obviously promote the disinformation, right? So the digital media is like rain of information. Every drop of that rain, it could be an information or could be a disinformation. So a lot of people might not be seeing the main media channels, but everybody will be having a phone. Maybe a taxi driver will be having a phone somewhere sitting in Nakhchivan. You know what I'm saying? So everybody would be having a phone somewhere. And so that actually counts a lot. So digital media needs to promote the positive narrative and the very foreign policy of that very country in order to foster its own benefits and all that.
Okay.
So it is very important nowadays. And for example, Pakistan and Azerbaijan have very good ties. So they collaborate like that. They promote the positive sides and the narrative and the government narrative and the strategic importance and their friendship and all that.
Okay.
But any country who would be against Pakistan or Azerbaijan would be doing the reverse to that, would be doing a different strategy. So we need to see how the countries counter those strategies. That's a very challenging thing because everybody has a phone.
Shiraz, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but nevertheless, you've certainly given us a very good in-depth analysis about the forum, and we appreciate your time and insight.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.
You're up to date with World News for the Hour. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned to A News for more updates.